Mom, Anna, what are you doing out here? Thomas Whitmore's voice broke as the rain poured down, cold and merciless, hammering against the marble steps of his Buckhead mansion. The silver Rolls-Royce idled behind him, its headlights slicing through the storm. There, in that beam of white light, two trembling figures crouched beside the trash bins near the iron gate. His heart froze. His mother, Margaret Whitmore, 68 years old, her silver curls plastered to her dark skin, was bent over a torn garbage bag. Beside her, Anna, his 6-year-old daughter, held a soggy paper plate in both hands. Her curls clung to her cheeks, her tiny lips blue from the cold. "Daddy?" Anna's voice wavered. The plate slipped from her hands and splashed into a puddle. Margaret turned, startled, her eyes wide with fear and shame. "Thomas," she whispered. "Go back inside, son, please." But Thomas couldn't move. The sight before him turned his world to glass. His proud, dignified mother kneeling in the mud. His child barefoot in the rain searching for food among the trash. "Mom," he stammered, stepping forward. "What are you doing?" Margaret straightened, trembling, her voice small against the storm. "We were just hungry, Thomas." The kitchen was locked, and Anna needed something to eat. She forced a faint smile, her eyes glistening. "Your trash still smells better than most people's meals." The words struck him like a knife. For a heartbeat, everything went silent except the rain. He knelt down, mud soaking into his tailored trousers. "God, what have I done?" he whispered. "If this moment touched your heart, take a second to share what it made you feel. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to know. And if stories like this move you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more heartfelt tales that remind us what truly matters." Anna threw her little arms around his neck. "Daddy, please don't be mad at Grandma. She was just trying to help." Margaret shook her head. "It's my fault. I couldn't stand watching her cry herself to sleep again." Thunder cracked above them. The sky seemed to mourn with him. Thomas felt the weight of guilt pressing against his chest until he could barely breathe. He looked at the two people who had given his life meaning, now standing before him like broken angels. All his money, his power, his empire, it meant nothing. "Come on," he said softly, lifting Anna into his arms and taking his mother's hand. "You're both freezing. Let's go inside." Margaret hesitated. "Thomas, please. Not now." "She's in there." "She?" His jaw tightened. "You mean Vanessa?" Margaret lowered her gaze. "She won't like it." He let out a hollow laugh. "She won't like it? Mom, you're eating from the trash and you're worried about her feelings?" Without another word, he led them through the iron gates. The mansion loomed ahead, glowing gold behind sheets of rain. Through the tall windows, light shimmered and laughter floated out. Inside, the world looked perfect, polished floors, crystal chandeliers, soft jazz humming from the speakers. At the center of the living room, Vanessa Whitmore, his 2-year-old wife, stood radiant in a white gown, a glass of champagne in one hand and her phone in the other. She was live streaming, her voice dripping with charm. "And that's what I love most about our family," she told her followers. "Balance, elegance, and grace." Her smile froze when she saw them. Thomas, soaked to the bone. Margaret and Anna, dripping wet and shivering. Vanessa, his voice was low, trembling. The chatter of guests died instantly. Vanessa blinked, confusion flashing across her pale face. "Thomas? You're home early." He took a step closer, still holding Anna. "Do you know where I found them?" She frowned. I don't understand." "By the trash," he said quietly. "Eating." A murmur spread through the room. Glasses clinked as hands shook. Vanessa's face went white. "They must have misunderstood," she said quickly, her voice cracking. Thomas's tone rose, echoing off the marble walls. "Misunderstood? My daughter was eating garbage, and my mother was apologizing for it." Margaret reached for his arm. "Thomas, please, not here." He turned to her, eyes glistening. "Not here? Mom, this is exactly where it needs to be said." Facing Vanessa again, his voice steadied low but sharp. "You told me we were a family. You smiled for every photo, every charity dinner, every camera. Was all of it a lie? Vanessa's eyes darted around, looking for sympathy, for someone to save her. I was protecting your image, Thomas. People talk. Your mother, she doesn't belong in this world. The room fell utterly silent. Thomas stared at her for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "Neither do I." He looked around the glittering room, the guests in designer suits, the marble, the gold. "Everyone, leave," he said. No one moved. "Now," he thundered. The guests scattered like frightened birds. Champagne spilled across the floor. Doors slammed. Silence returned. Only the sound of the rain remained, dripping from his clothes, from his mother's hair, from the broken illusion of perfection. Vanessa stood frozen, mascara streaking her cheeks. "Thomas," she whispered. "I can explain." He cut her off with a glance cold enough to still the air. "Don't. The rain's washed away enough lies tonight." He turned to Margaret and Anna, voice soft again. "Go upstairs. Get dry. I'll take care of this." Margaret looked into his eyes, saw the pain, the fury, the awakening, and nodded. She led Anna gently up the stairs. When they disappeared, Thomas faced Vanessa one last time. "I built this home so my family would never know hunger," he said quietly. "But you've turned it into a place where love starves." Lightning flashed across the windows, illuminating his face, no longer that of a billionaire, but of a man stripped bare by truth. He turned toward the staircase, where faint laughter echoed from his daughter's room. Anna's voice drifted down softly. "Daddy, are we still rich?" Thomas looked up, his voice tender, broken. "Not anymore, sweetheart. But we'll be fine." Then he looked toward the door, the storm still raging outside, and whispered to himself, "I thought I built an empire, but I only built a cage." The rain outside pounded harder, as if the sky itself wanted to wash the guilt from his soul. And for the first time in years, Thomas Whitmore let the truth drench him completely. The morning after the storm felt eerily quiet. The air still smelled of rain, heavy and cold, as if the sky hadn't finished grieving. Thomas Whitmore stood by the kitchen window of the Buckhead mansion, staring at the wet driveway where the night before had carved a scar into his soul. He hadn't slept. The echo of his mother's voice, trembling and soft, "We were just hungry, Thomas," still haunted every corner of his mind. He'd sent Vanessa to her room, too furious to look at her. Margaret and Anna were asleep upstairs, wrapped in warm blankets. For the first time, the house felt like a stranger's home. Every chandelier, every polished surface, every silent painting looked like it was mocking him. He poured himself a cup of coffee and didn't drink it. His reflection in the glass window looked like a man he didn't know anymore, a face pale from exhaustion, eyes full of disbelief. How could he have missed it? His own mother, the woman who once cleaned other people's floors so he could study, had been starving under his roof. And his little girl, eating from a trash bag. He pressed his palms to his eyes and exhaled shakily. From the hallway came a faint sound, small footsteps, hesitant. "Daddy?" Anna's sleepy voice called. She wore one of his oversized shirts, her curls still slightly damp. "Morning, sweetheart," he said, forcing a smile. "You feeling better?" She nodded. "Grandma made me oatmeal. The kind with cinnamon." Thomas smiled faintly. "She always makes it best." Anna came closer, her small hand clutching his sleeve. "Daddy, are you mad at Mommy?" His chest tightened. He crouched down to meet her eyes. "Why do you ask that?" "Because she was crying," Anna said simply. "She told me you don't understand her." He sighed. Sometimes grown-ups hurt each other without meaning to. But what she did... He stopped himself. "How do you explain cruelty to a 6-year-old? Daddy's just sad right now. But we'll be okay." She studied his face, then wrapped her arms around his neck. "It's okay, Daddy. Grandma says storms wash away bad things." He hugged her tightly, swallowing hard. Out of the mouths of children, truth always came pure. When Anna went back upstairs, Thomas turned toward the staircase leading to the east wing. Vanessa's wing. His footsteps echoed on the marble as he walked down the long hallway lined with portraits of Success magazine covers, business awards, charity gala photos. He paused at one. His wedding picture. He and Vanessa, smiling before a white arch of roses. Behind them, his mother stood quietly, her expression cautious, as if she already sensed what he didn't. He entered the bedroom without knocking. Vanessa sat on the edge of the bed, still in her silk robe, makeup smeared, eyes swollen from crying. "Thomas," she began, voice trembling, "please let me explain." He crossed his arms. "Explain what?" "How you turned this house into hell for the two people I love most." "It wasn't like that," she protested. "You're exaggerating. I was trying to make them understand boundaries. You know how your mother is, she doesn't respect space." "Space?" His tone sharpened. "You mean the space between the dining table and the kitchen? The space where you made her eat like a servant?" Vanessa's lips trembled. "I only wanted order. You have no idea how people look at me, Thomas. I'm the only white woman married to a man whose mother—" She stopped herself too late. His eyes went cold. "Say it," he said quietly. "Whose mother what?" "Whose mother doesn't fit in," she whispered. "People talk, they say things. They ask me where Anna gets her curls. They look at me like I stole you from somewhere else. You think that's easy for me?" He took a slow step forward. "You think I care what they say? You think my mother's skin is a burden?" "I didn't mean it like that." "You meant it exactly like that," he snapped. The silence after that felt like thunder. Vanessa's shoulders sagged. "Thomas, I love you. I was just trying to protect us." "Protect us from what?" "From love that looks different than yours." He turned away, his voice breaking. "Vanessa, my mother kept me alive when the world wanted to starve me. She gave me every ounce of dignity I have, and you made her eat from a trash bin." Tears streamed down her face. "I lost control," she whispered. "I was jealous. I saw how close you were to her, to Anna. I felt left out." Thomas closed his eyes. For a fleeting moment, pity touched him, but it died just as quickly. "You weren't left out," he said quietly. "You walked away." He reached for the wedding photo on the dresser, staring at it. "You came into my life like sunlight, Vanessa. But sunlight can burn when it's too close." He set the picture down. Glass facing the table. "This house doesn't feel like home anymore. Not for them. Not for me." Vanessa's voice cracked. "Are you leaving me?" "I don't know yet," he said, "but something has to change." He turned and left the room, her sobs echoing behind him. Downstairs, Margaret was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands folded, her expression calm but tired. The morning light softened the wrinkles around her eyes that had seen too many storms. "You heard?" he asked. "Every word," she said. "You did what you had to." He sat down opposite her. "I failed you, Mom." "No, son," she said gently. "You just forgot where you came from. But the good news is, you can still go back." He looked at her, truly looked at her, and realized she wasn't angry, only sad and proud. "I'll make this right," he said. "I swear it." She nodded. "Then start by taking care of your child. She doesn't need wealth, she needs warmth." He reached for her hand, rough and warm, and held it. "I don't deserve you," she smiled softly. "You don't have to deserve love, Thomas. You just have to give it back." Later that afternoon, as rain clouds drifted away, Thomas took Anna for a drive. They passed through the city, the skyline he had built his fortune under, the billboards bearing his name. He saw them differently now, not as symbols of success, but as walls between him and the people who mattered. Anna pointed out the window. "Look, Daddy, the clouds are gone." He smiled faintly. "Yeah, baby, maybe the worst is over." But deep down, he knew the storm had only changed form. The next one was waiting, not outside, but inside his home. That evening, Thomas sat alone in his study, the one room in the house that still felt untouched by lies. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the air was thick with silence. The grandfather clock ticked steadily, each sound a reminder of how time could wound as much as heal. He stared at the family portrait above his desk himself. Vanessa, Anna, and his mother. The frame gleamed under the lamplight, yet the smiles inside it felt false now, almost cruel. He rubbed his temples. He hadn't gone to the office that morning. His assistant had called 3 times. He ignored them all. What good were meetings, profits, shareholders when the people who mattered had been starving in his own home? The door creaked softly. Margaret appeared, dressed in her old gray cardigan, the one she'd worn since his childhood. "Thomas," she said gently, "you've been in here all day." He managed a tired smile. "I guess I'm afraid if I stop thinking, I'll start feeling." She chuckled faintly. "Feeling is what keeps us human, baby." He gestured for her to sit. "Mom, do you ever wish I hadn't made all this money? That I'd stayed the boy who fixed radios in your kitchen?" "Never," she said. "You worked hard. But I do wish you'd remembered why you started." He nodded slowly. "I thought success would buy peace." "Peace doesn't live in marble walls," she replied softly. "It lives in hearts that still know gratitude." He looked at her hands, rough from decades of cleaning houses. They were the same hands that once wiped tears from his boyhood face, that now trembled from age. "I forgot," he whispered. "I forgot everything you taught me." Margaret reached across the desk and laid her hand over his. "Then remember now." Before he could answer, a knock came at the door. Vanessa stood there, pale, her hair tied loosely, face bare of makeup. For once, she looked small, not glamorous, not powerful, just lost. "Thomas," she said quietly. "May I come in?" Margaret looked at her son. He gave a reluctant nod. Vanessa stepped in, her eyes darting toward Margaret, then down. I want to apologize." Margaret rose slowly. "I'll give you 2 a moment." But Thomas stopped her. "No," he said. "You stay. Whatever she has to say, you deserve to hear it." Vanessa swallowed hard. "Last night changed everything for me. When I saw you holding them, Thomas, something inside me broke. I realized I'd spent my whole life trying to be seen, but I'd forgotten how to see." Thomas leaned back in his chair. "Go on." She hesitated, tears filling her eyes. "When I married you, I told myself I loved you, and I did, in my own way. But I also loved what you represented. Power, security. I thought being with you would finally make me feel enough, and when it didn't, I blamed everyone around me. Your mother, your daughter, even you." Her voice cracked. "I was cruel because I was afraid." Thomas's expression softened slightly, though pain still lingered in his eyes. "Afraid of what?" "Of not belonging, of being ordinary." She looked at Margaret. "I grew up in a world that taught me to hide my flaws and pretend perfection. But last night, I saw real dignity for the first time. It wasn't mine, it was hers." Margaret's eyes glistened, but she said nothing. Vanessa wiped her cheeks. "I can't undo what I did, but I want to make it right." "You can't make it right with words," Thomas said quietly. "Not anymore." Vanessa nodded. "I know." She placed a folded envelope on the desk. "These are the documents to transfer my shares in the company back to you. I don't deserve to profit from your name." He didn't touch the envelope. "What do you expect me to do with that? Forgive you?" "No," she whispered. "Just to understand." For a long moment, no one spoke. The rain began again outside, soft and steady. Finally, Margaret stood and walked toward Vanessa. "Child," she said gently, "understanding isn't given, it's earned. But repentance starts somewhere." Vanessa's shoulders shook. "I don't know how to start." Margaret took her hand. "By feeding the ones you hurt, not starving them." Vanessa's eyes met hers, and for the first time, she didn't look away. Thomas watched in silence. Something in him shifted, not forgiveness. Not yet. but a small crack in the wall around his heart. "Mom," he said after a pause, "you don't have to forgive her." "I don't," she replied. "But hate is too heavy for me to carry." Later, after Vanessa left, Margaret lingered by the door. "You know," she said softly, "maybe this house can still be healed." "I don't think so," he murmured. "Too many ghosts." She smiled. "Ghosts only haunt the ungrateful. Show it some grace. And even a house like this can breathe again." That night, Thomas walked through the silent halls. The portraits seemed to watch him. He stopped in front of one of his father, a man he barely remembered, who'd left when Thomas was 5. He'd spent his whole life running from that emptiness, building towers of success to hide the fear of becoming him. But in the end, he'd become worse, a man so busy, proving himself that he forgot to protect the people who mattered most. He went upstairs to check on Anna. She slept soundly, a teddy bear clutched to her chest. Margaret sat beside her bed, humming softly. The same hymn she used to sing when he was small. "You never stop watching over us," he whispered. "That's what mothers do," she said, "even when their sons grow taller than their faith." He kissed her forehead and looked down at his daughter. "I'm going to fix this," he said. "For her, for you, for me." Margaret smiled faintly. "Then start tomorrow. Start with breakfast." "Breakfast?" he echoed. "Yes," she said. "Cook something with your own hands. Let love taste like effort again." When she left the room, Thomas lingered a moment longer, listening to the steady rhythm of Anna's breathing. It sounded like forgiveness. The next morning, he would cook. But tonight, he stood at the window, watching rain streak down the glass, whispering into the dark, "I won't let the storm win again." The next morning, sunlight poured through the tall windows of the kitchen, soft and hesitant, as if afraid to disturb the quiet. For the first time in years, Thomas Whitmore woke before dawn without an alarm clock or a meeting to chase. He lay there for a moment, listening to the faint rhythm of his daughter's laughter echoing from upstairs, the sound of life returning to a house that had forgotten warmth. He rose slowly, rolled up his sleeves, and walked to the kitchen. The marble counters, usually spotless and cold, looked different in the morning, light less like a symbol of wealth, more like a blank page waiting to be rewritten. He opened the pantry and stared blankly at the rows of imported food, expensive and untouched. Then he reached for the simplest things: flour, milk, eggs, and butter. Margaret entered quietly, wrapped in her worn cardigan, eyes filled with curiosity and something like amusement. "Well now," she said softly. "Are we witnessing a miracle?" Thomas smiled faintly. "Don't get too excited. I'm not sure I remember how to cook." She leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Oh, you remember. You just buried it under too much pride." He cracked an egg, chuckling under his breath. "You're probably right. Like always." She said. "Don't you forget it." The smell of sizzling batter filled the air, warm and sweet. Anna came bounding down the stairs, hair tousled, still wearing her pajamas. "Daddy, you're cooking." He turned with a grin. "Pancakes. Think you'll like them?" Her eyes widened. "With blueberries?" He nodded. "And a little cinnamon, Grandma's style." Margaret laughed softly. "Now that's how you win a child's heart back." "Ugh." They gathered around the small breakfast table by the window, not the long dining table that Vanessa had once claimed as her stage, but the one Margaret had insisted on keeping near the back porch. The sunlight spilled over them, making the steam from the pancakes shimmer like gold. As Anna took her first bite, she giggled. "Daddy, you should open a restaurant." Thomas smiled, shaking his head. "No, sweet girl. I already have the only 2 customers I'll ever need." Margaret's eyes glistened. "Your father would be proud, you know." He hesitated. "Would he?" "He'd be proud that you're learning what really matters," she said quietly. He never did. They ate in silence for a while, each of them lost in thought. Outside, birds sang as if nothing tragic had ever touched the world. But inside Thomas, something deep and unfamiliar was stirring peace. When breakfast ended, he washed the dishes himself, ignoring Margaret's protests. "Mom, he said with a smirk. If you try to help, I'll fire you. She laughed so hard she nearly dropped her mug. Boy, I raised you too well to believe that threat. As he rinsed the plates, his phone buzzed on the counter. A message from his assistant. Board meeting at 9 a.m. Investors demanding updates. He stared at it for a long time, then turned the phone off. Not today, he murmured. Margaret watched him. You sure about that? Yes, he said. I've missed too many breakfasts already. By mid-morning, the mansion felt lighter. The tension that once haunted its halls had thinned like fog in sunlight. Even the portraits on the wall seemed to soften. But peace never lasts long where guilt still lingers. Just as Thomas poured himself another cup of coffee, a knock came at the front door firm, deliberate. He glanced at Margaret. You expecting anyone? She shook her head. No. But go see. Maybe the storm brought someone back. He opened the door. Vanessa stood there, dressed simply in jeans and a plain sweater, no makeup, no jewelry, a shadow of the woman who had once glowed under chandeliers. In her hands, she held a small paper bag. I brought something, she said quietly. For Anna. Thomas hesitated, blocking the doorway slightly. What is it? Her favorite storybook, she said, lifting the bag. The one with the sea turtle. She left it in our room. He studied her for a long moment before stepping aside. Come in. Margaret appeared in the hallway, expression unreadable. Vanessa met her eyes, her voice barely above a whisper. Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore. Morning, Margaret replied. You look different. I feel different, Vanessa said softly. Anna ran into the hall at that moment. Mommy. The word caught Thomas off guard. It had been weeks since Anna had called Vanessa that. She ran up and hugged her around the waist. Vanessa knelt, tears welling. Hi, baby, I missed you. Anna smiled. We had pancakes. Daddy made them. And Grandma let me pour syrup all by myself. Vanessa laughed, the sound fragile but real. That sounds wonderful. Thomas crossed his arms, watching quietly. He could see Margaret's eyes soften, though she said nothing. I didn't come to stay, Vanessa said, standing again. I know I've lost that right. I just needed to see that you're okay. Anna tilted her head. Will you come back tomorrow? Vanessa froze. That's not up to me, sweetheart. Thomas placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. Let's give Mommy a minute, okay? Go help Grandma with the dishes. Anna nodded and ran off. The hallway fell silent. Vanessa turned to him. Thomas, I don't expect forgiveness. But I can't stop caring. I've been talking to someone, a counselor. I want to change. I need to. He studied her face, searching for the mask she used to wear. It wasn't there anymore. Change isn't easy, he said finally. It's harder than confessing. I know, she said. That's why I came to start. Margaret appeared again, holding Anna's hand. Thomas, she said gently. There's always room for grace in a house this big. But grace doesn't mean forgetting. He nodded slowly. I'm not ready to forgive, Mom. Not yet. Margaret smiled. Then don't. Just live right, and forgiveness will find you. Vanessa's eyes glistened. I'll leave you now. But thank you for letting me in even for a moment. Oh, as she stepped outside, Thomas watched her walk down the driveway. The sun caught the rain puddles, and her reflection shimmered in them fragile, like a ghost learning how to live again. Margaret touched his arm. You did right, she said, letting her face what she broke. He nodded. Maybe. But part of me still wonders if I broke something too. She smiled faintly. We all do. The trick, son, is learning how to build again. He looked through the open door, sunlight spilling in across the marble floor, and whispered, Then I guess tomorrow, we start building. That night, after tucking Anna into bed, Thomas lingered by the window once more. The air was clear now, the sky pale with stars. For the first time, the mansion felt alive, not perfect, not whole, but breathing again. He closed his eyes and whispered into the stillness. This time, I'll get it right. The following morning, Thomas woke to the sound of laughter coming from the backyard. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming. He hadn't heard that kind of joy echo through the house in years. Pulling on a sweater, he walked to the glass doors and froze. Margaret and Anna were sitting at the old picnic table beneath the oak tree, a stack of pancakes between them. The morning light caught in the silver of his mother's hair as she pretended to sip tea from one of Anna's plastic cups. The scene was simple, almost fragile, yet it felt sacred. He stepped outside quietly, barefoot on the dew-soaked grass. Margaret noticed him first and smiled. Well, look who decided to join the living. Anna jumped up, running to him. Daddy. We're having a breakfast picnic. I can see that, he said, scooping her up. You two look like you're having way too much fun without me. Margaret poured pretend tea into a plastic cup and handed it to him. Drink up, Mr. Billionaire. It's a special blend, gratitude and humility. He chuckled softly, taking the cup. I could use both. As they sat together, the quiet hum of morning life surrounded them, the chirping birds, the rustle of leaves, the faint hum of distant traffic. Thomas couldn't remember the last time he had felt this still. After breakfast, Margaret took Anna to the garden to water her little patch of flowers. Thomas stayed behind, clearing the plates. The phone buzzed on the patio table, a call from his assistant, Lauren. He hesitated before answering. Hey, Lauren. Good morning, Mr. Whitmore. I'm sorry to bother you, but the board is growing restless. You missed yesterday's meeting, and investors are asking about your silence on the expansion project. He rubbed his forehead. Tell them I need another week. Sir, she said carefully, you've never postponed a deal before. I know, he replied. Maybe that's the problem. La. There was a pause. Are you all right? She asked softly. He glanced toward the garden, where Anna was twirling among the flowers, her laughter ringing through the air. I think, he said slowly, for the first time, I might be. When he hung up, he noticed the envelope Vanessa had left sitting on the outdoor table, her company shares. He hadn't touched it since. It looked harmless, just a thin white rectangle, but it held years of deceit, guilt, and choices he could no longer undo. Margaret returned from the garden, wiping her hands on a towel. You're thinking too hard again, she said. He nodded. I keep wondering when I lost sight of everything that mattered. She sat down beside him. It wasn't one big mistake, Thomas. It was 1,000 small ones you ignored, because they looked like success. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the sky. You always know how to find the truth hiding under my pride. That's a mother's job, she said, smiling. We keep the mirror clean so our children can see themselves. He chuckled softly. And what do you see in me now? A man trying to come home, she said. And that's enough for today. The rest of the morning passed quietly. Margaret took Anna to the park, leaving Thomas alone with his thoughts. For the first time, he walked through his house without rushing. The silence no longer suffocated him, it invited him to listen. He paused at the grand piano in the living room. It hadn't been played since Evelyn, his first wife, passed away. She had loved music, filling the house with melodies that made him believe joy could last forever. He sat down slowly, running his fingers over the dusty keys. The sound that emerged was rough, uncertain, but real. The notes stumbled at first, then began to find rhythm. A simple tune one Evelyn used to hum while cooking dinner. When Margaret and Anna returned, they stood quietly at the doorway, watching him play. Anna's voice broke the silence. Daddy, I didn't know you could do that. He smiled. Neither did I. Margaret's eyes softened. Your wife would be proud. I hope so, he whispered. I'm trying to find my way back to her somehow. Later that afternoon, Thomas decided to visit the neighborhood where he grew up, East Point. It had been decades since he'd walked those cracked sidewalks. He told Margaret he'd be back before dark, but she insisted on coming. Old memories shouldn't be faced alone, she said. The drive was quiet. When they reached the street of their old duplex, Thomas pulled over. The small brick house leaned with age, the paint peeling, the porch light flickering. A young mother stood out front, holding a toddler, The sight tugged at something deep in him. Margaret smiled faintly. Doesn't look like much, does it? It looks like home, he said softly. She nodded. You were 10 when you swore you'd build me a house so big I'd never have to clean again. I told you I'd rather have a son who visited often than one who bought me marble floors. He glanced at her, guilt shadowing his features. I thought I could give you everything. You did, she said gently. You gave me a reason to keep believing. That's worth more than any mansion. As they stood there, a group of children ran past, their laughter ringing down the street. One of them stopped, recognizing Thomas from a billboard nearby. Hey! Aren't you that tech guy? Thomas smiled. Used to be. The boy frowned. Used to be? What are you now? He thought for a moment before replying. A son. A dad. Trying to get it right. The boy grinned and ran off. Margaret chuckled. That's the best answer you've ever given in your life. On the drive back, the city skyline came into view. The glass towers gleamed in the sunset, symbols of all he'd once worshipped. But now, they looked cold, hollow. I don't think I belong up there anymore, he said quietly. You belong wherever your heart works, Margaret replied. That's the only address that matters. When they arrived home, the lights were warm. The smell of fresh cookies drifted from the kitchen. Anna ran to greet them, her hands dusted with flour. Grandma, let me bake, she said proudly. Margaret smiled, and she didn't burn a single one. Thomas crouched and hugged his daughter, breathing in the scent of sugar and sunlight. You did good, sweetheart. That night, after Anna fell asleep, he and Margaret sat on the porch with cups of tea. The air was cool, the city quiet. Mom, he said softly. I think I know what I need to do. She looked at him. And what's that? Start over, he said. Not in business, in life. Margaret nodded. Then start tomorrow. The sunrise won't wait forever. He smiled faintly, the night wind brushing against his face. For the first time in decades, Thomas Whitmore felt small, not as a failure, but as a man finally humble enough to begin again. Thomas woke before sunrise the next day, long before the house stirred. The sky beyond the window glowed faintly pink, the kind of color that made him think of renewal. He sat at the edge of the bed, staring at his hands. For years, those hands had built empires, signing contracts, shaking investors' palms, pointing toward goals no one else could see. But now, as light crept across his skin, they looked like something else entirely. Hands that had forgotten how to hold what truly mattered. He walked quietly down the hallway toward the kitchen. The floorboards creaked in familiar places, small sounds of memory. The smell of fresh coffee drifted from the percolator. Margaret was already there, as if she'd never gone to sleep. Mornin', baby, she said, smiling. You've got that look again, same one you had when you were 9 and decided to fix that old radio. He chuckled softly. And I nearly burned the kitchen down. You learned, though, she said, sipping her coffee. You always learn sometimes slower than I'd like. Thomas sat down across from her. Mom, I've been thinking about something. Maybe we should leave this house. Margaret raised an eyebrow. Leave it? After all that marble and glass you built? It's not home, he said simply. It never was. It's just a shell with fancy furniture. She looked at him for a long moment. Where would you go? I don't know, he admitted. Maybe back to East Point. Fix up the old place, or build something smaller. Something real. Margaret smiled faintly. Home isn't a place, Thomas. It's a promise. Wherever you can keep that promise, that's where you belong. Oh, he nodded slowly. Then I guess it's time I keep it. Before Margaret could reply, Anna came running in, still in her pajamas, clutching a crayon drawing in her hand. Daddy, look! He took it carefully. It showed 3 stick figures holding hands under a crooked sundae. In the corner, she'd drawn a big red heart. It's us, she said proudly. Me, you, and Grandma. We're happy again. Thomas smiled, his throat tightening. It's beautiful, sweetheart. Uh, can we hang it in your office? She asked. He hesitated, then nodded. Better. We'll put it in the living room where everyone can see. After breakfast, he drove Margaret and Anna to the community center in East Point. The place had changed since his childhood. The paint faded. The playground rusted, but the laughter was the same. Children ran barefoot across the cracked basketball court, their joy echoing off the brick walls. As they stepped out of the car, an old man sitting on a bench squinted up at Thomas. "Ain't that the Whitmore boy?" Thomas smiled. "It's been a long time, Mr. Jenkins." The man grinned, revealing gaps where teeth used to be. "I'll be damned. You made it big, didn't you? Always knew you would. But what brings you back here?" Thomas looked around, his eyes soft, trying to remember what I left behind. Margaret chuckled. "He's finally listening to his mama, that's what." They spent the morning helping out at the center, Margaret serving food, Anna handing out juice boxes, Thomas fixing broken light fixtures. The simplicity of the work soothed him. Sweat replaced guilt. Gratitude replaced shame. A young volunteer approached him shyly. "Mr. Whitmore, sir. I read about you online. You used to run one of the biggest tech companies in Atlanta, right?" "I still do," Thomas said. "For now." "Then why are you here?" He smiled. "Because some lessons are better learned away from skyscrapers." The boy nodded, eyes wide with respect. "Well, I'm glad you came. Kids around here need people like you." Thomas looked toward the small group of children chasing a basketball across the court. "No," he said softly. "I think it's people like them who remind me who I'm supposed to be." By afternoon, they returned home exhausted but lighter. Anna fell asleep in the back seat, clutching a small stuffed bear someone had given her at the center. Margaret leaned her head against the window, humming an old gospel tune. As they pulled into the driveway, Thomas noticed a sleek black sedan parked near the gate. He frowned. "We're not expecting anyone, are we?" Margaret shook her head. "Doesn't look familiar." The driver stepped out, Vanessa. Thomas felt his stomach tighten. She looked different again, less fragile than before, but humbled. Her hair was tied back, and she held a cardboard box in her arms. "I didn't mean to intrude," she said softly as he approached. "I just came to drop this off." "What is it?" he asked. "Anna's things," she said. "Some drawings, her favorite pajamas, a toy she left." She hesitated. "And something for you." He glanced at the box. Inside lay a small photo album, leather-bound and worn. "What's this?" "I found it when I was packing," she said. "It's all the photos we took that weren't for magazines or newspapers. Just us." He picked it up gently. The first photo showed him and Vanessa at a small dinner table, laughing over burnt pasta. Another showed her holding baby Anna, exhaustion and wonder in her eyes. "You should keep these," he said quietly. "No," she replied. "They belong with your family. Whatever we were, you built it with love once. I don't want to erase that." He looked at her, conflicted. "Vanessa, I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything," she said. "Just be better than we were." For a long moment, they stood in silence. The wind rustled the magnolia trees along the driveway. Then she turned to leave. As the car pulled away, Margaret stepped beside him. "She's trying, Thomas. That counts for something." He nodded slowly, clutching the album. "I know, but I can't fix her story for her." "No," Margaret said, "but you can fix your own." That night, after tucking Anna into bed, Thomas sat on the porch with the album in his lap. He flipped through each page slowly, the smiles, the milestones, the moments he had missed by chasing more. Margaret joined him, carrying 2 mugs of tea. "Thinking again?" she asked. "Always," he said with a small smile. "I keep wondering how many versions of me I've left behind." She set her mug down. "Just keep the one that knows how to love. The rest can stay in the past." He nodded, closing the album. "Tomorrow, I'm going to do something different." Margaret smiled knowingly. "I figured you might." "I'm going to take some of that company money," he said, "and build something that matters. Not another tower, something for the kids back in East Point." Margaret's eyes glistened. "Now that's my boy." As night settled over the city, Thomas leaned back in his chair, listening to the hum of cicadas. The mansion no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a starting line. The next week unfolded like a quiet promise. For the first time in years, Thomas Whitmore didn't wake to the buzz of alarms or conference calls. Instead, he rose with the dawn, listening to the faint sounds of life returning to rhythm. Margaret humming softly as she brewed coffee. Anna's small feet padding across the hallway. The distant trill of birds along the garden fence. On that Monday morning, Thomas made a decision. He stood before the mirror, adjusting the cuffs of a simple blue shirt. No tie, no designer jacket, just himself. In the reflection, he saw less of the billionaire and more of the boy from East Point who used to dream with nothing but stubborn hope in his heart. Margaret appeared in the doorway, drying her hands with a dish towel. "You're dressed like a man who's got something to prove," she teased. He smiled faintly. "Not to anyone else. Just to myself." Then it's a good start," she said, walking closer. "Where are you off to?" "East Point," he replied. "I've been thinking about what we saw at the community center. The leaky roof, the broken swings, the empty shelves. I want to do something about it." Her eyes warmed with pride. "Now that's the son I raised." He grinned. "Don't get too sentimental yet. I'll probably make 100 mistakes along the way." Margaret laughed. "Then you'll learn 100 things more." He kissed her cheek. "I'll be back before dinner. Tell Anna I'll bring her ice cream." Margaret smiled knowingly. "You better. That girl's got a memory like her mama." The drive south took him through winding streets that had once felt like the edge of the world. But now, they felt like truth, real, raw, unfiltered. The downtown skyline disappeared behind him, and in its place rose small brick houses, faded murals, kids riding bikes through puddles. The same East Point that had shaped him. When he pulled into the lot beside the community center, a handful of volunteers were already there, sweeping, painting, repairing fences. The old signboard read, "East Point Hope Center," letters faded but determined. A woman in her late 40s, wearing a volunteer vest, spotted him and walked over. "You're Mr. Whitmore, right?" "Yes, ma'am," he said, extending his hand. "But please, just Thomas." She shook it firmly. "I'm Denise, director here. We don't usually see billionaires in our part of town." He chuckled softly. "Well, I'm trying to retire from that title." Denise raised an eyebrow. "You here to make a donation?" He shook his head. "Something a little better. I hope. I want to help rebuild." She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, Mr. Whitmore. Let's see if you can handle a paint roller before we give you the big jobs." The hours slipped by in a blur of work. Thomas climbed ladders, painted walls, hammered loose boards. Sweat dripped down his back, staining the collar of his shirt, but he didn't care. Each stroke of the brush felt like cleansing something inside him. By noon, the children began to gather, small faces peeking through the gate, curious about the stranger covered in paint. One brave boy approached. "Hey, mister, you fixing our court?" Thomas smiled. "Trying to." The boy tilted his head. "You look too fancy to be fixing stuff." He laughed. "I used to think so too." Another voice chimed in from behind the same young volunteer from before. "Mr. Whitmore, we found some old computers in storage. Maybe you could help get them running again?" Thomas followed him inside to a dusty room lined with broken desks and outdated monitors. He ran his fingers over one of the machines and felt a flicker of inspiration. "You know," he said slowly, "we could start a small learning lab here. Teach kids coding, tech, design the stuff nobody ever brought to neighborhoods like this." Denise crossed her arms, skeptical but intrigued. "You serious?" He nodded. "Completely. I'll fund it myself, and I'll bring volunteers from my company to teach." She gave a low whistle. "Now that's what I call paying back." Thomas smiled faintly. "No, that's what I call coming home." That afternoon, when he returned to Buckhead, his clothes were stained, his hands raw, and yet he felt more alive than he had in decades. Anna met him at the door, eyes bright. "Daddy, you promised ice cream." He laughed and lifted her up. "And I never break a promise twice." They sat together in the kitchen, Margaret, Anna, and him sharing 3 bowls of vanilla ice cream as the golden sunset filtered through the window. Margaret studied him quietly for a while, then said, "You look different." "Do I?" he asked, like a man who finally stopped running from himself. He looked at her with gratitude. "You always see right through me." "That's a mother's superpower," she said, smiling. Later that evening, Thomas received a call from his lawyer. "Thomas, about your divorce papers. Do you want me to proceed with the final filing?" He hesitated. Vanessa's face flashed in his mind, broken, repentant, but still part of a past he couldn't rewrite. "Yes," he said finally. "It's time." After hanging up, he walked outside. The air was cool, the sky scattered with stars. He stood on the porch, looking toward the horizon, where the city lights shimmered faintly. He realized he no longer craved that world of noise and applause. What he wanted now was quieter a life, with meaning. Not headlines. Margaret joined him with a blanket draped over her shoulders. "You all right, son?" He nodded. "Yeah. For the first time in years, I am." "You did good today," she said softly, "but don't stop there. Kindness isn't a one-day job." He smiled. "Then I guess I've got a lifetime of work ahead." She chuckled. "Amen to that." Before heading inside, he glanced once more at the stars. "Mom? I think I finally understand something you used to say." "Huh. What's that?" "That love isn't about giving people what they want. It's about showing up when they've already stopped asking." Margaret's eyes glistened. "You finally learned the language of love, Thomas." As the night settled deep over Buckhead, the mansion no longer echoed with emptiness. Somewhere upstairs, Anna was humming to her dolls, and Margaret's quiet steps moved through the hall. And in that peace, Thomas Whitmore finally let go of the man he used to be. The following Saturday, Thomas parked his truck in front of the East Point Hope Center again. The morning sun gleamed on the fresh coat of paint, a cheerful yellow that made the building look alive. Children were already gathering by the gate, laughing, their sneakers squeaking on the damp pavement. The new basketball hoops had been installed the day before, and a row of donated computers waited inside for connection. It was the first day of something new, and the air carried that electric hum of possibility. Thomas stepped out, wearing jeans and a plain gray t-shirt. Margaret and Anna followed behind him. Margaret carried a tray of homemade muffins, and Anna held a sign she had painted herself. "Welcome to the Hope Lab." When they entered, Denise waved from across the room. "Morning, Thomas. I didn't think billionaires worked weekends." He grinned. "I told you, I'm retired from that life." Retired, huh? Then I hope you don't mind a little chaos," she said, nodding toward the corner where a group of volunteers tried to untangle wires and set up monitors. "Chaos is where good things begin," Thomas replied, rolling up his sleeves. Margaret set the muffins on a folding table near the entrance. "Food first," she declared. "You can't build hope on an empty stomach." Denise laughed. "Now that's gospel truth." Huh. The morning buzzed with activity, kids darting between desks, volunteers laughing, paint still drying in the hallway. Thomas moved through it all, shaking hands, adjusting cables, explaining to wide-eyed children how computers worked. Anna sat on a stool nearby, proudly showing 2 girls how to use a keyboard. "See?" she said in her small voice. "You just press this to make words come out. Daddy says the computer's like magic. But only if you're kind to it." One of the girls giggled. "That's silly." Anna shrugged. "So is being mean to Grandma, but people still do it." The laughter around them quieted for a moment, but Thomas smiled gently from across the room. Out of the mouths of children again, truth unfiltered, pure. By noon, everything was running. The computer lab glowed softly under the fluorescent lights. The hum of fans filled the air as children explored games, typing lessons, and drawing programs. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Denise approached, wiping her forehead. "Thomas, I'll be honest. I didn't think you'd come back after last week. Folks like you show up for photos, not paint rollers." Thomas chuckled. "I've had enough photos to last a lifetime." She smiled. "You really mean to keep this going?" He nodded. "I'm funding it for a year, but after that, I want the community to run it. I'll help train the volunteers, set up a small scholarship fund, and bring in teachers from my company. Denise folded her arms, impressed. You sure you want to give that much? He looked toward Anna, now laughing with a group of kids, her curls bouncing. I already gave too little when it mattered most, he said quietly. I'm just trying to balance the scales. Outside, Margaret sat beneath a shady tree, watching the scene with quiet pride. A few older women from the neighborhood gathered around her, drawn by her gentle presence. You must be his mother, one said. He's doing something good here. Margaret smiled. He's just remembering his roots. Sometimes you have to fall hard before you can stand tall. Another woman chuckled. Preach, sister. The sound of children's laughter carried through the open windows. Margaret looked up at the blue sky and whispered a small prayer of thanks. That afternoon, Thomas was helping a young boy fix a loose mouse cable when he heard a soft voice behind him. Thomas? He turned. Vanessa stood at the doorway, her hands clasped, uncertainty in her posture. She wore a plain blouse and jeans, her face free of makeup. For a moment, everything stilled. Vanessa, he said quietly. What are you doing here? I heard about the project, she said. Denise called me. She thought maybe I could help with the media outreach. Denise appeared from behind a row of computers. I figured you two could handle a reunion like adults. Thomas hesitated. He looked at Vanessa, her eyes no longer sharp or defensive, just weary and hopeful. You really want to help? She nodded. If you'll let me. He studied her for a long moment, then gestured toward the room. Then start by listening. These kids don't need a show. They need a story. She nodded, stepping closer, her gaze softening as she watched the children. They remind me of you, she said quietly. Thomas almost smiled. Except they already know what matters. Vanessa turned to him. Thomas, I know there's no undoing what I did. But watching you like this teaching. Building again, I realize how much I lost chasing something hollow. If there's any way I can help heal what I broke, even just a little, I'll do it. He met her eyes. And for a moment the air between them was heavy with the ghosts of what had been. Healing isn't a job, he said gently. It's a choice you make every day. Vanessa nodded slowly. Then I'll keep choosing it. From the other side of the room, Anna waved. Mommy, come see. I drew a robot. Vanessa blinked, tears forming. She still calls me that. Thomas's voice softened. She remembers the good in people better than we do. Vanessa walked to Anna and knelt beside her, admiring the drawing as the little girl beamed. Thomas watched from a distance, his heart heavy, but calm. He didn't know if forgiveness was possible, but he finally understood that peace didn't depend on it. By sunset, the center began to empty. Families said goodbye, children clutching coloring sheets and snacks. Thomas locked up the building and stood for a while outside, watching the last light fade over the rooftops. Vanessa joined him quietly. You did something beautiful today, she said. He shook his head. We did something necessary. She smiled faintly. I'm proud of you. He looked at her, not with anger or longing, but something gentler acceptance. Take care of yourself, Vanessa. I will, she said softly. And Thomas, thank you for letting me see this. She walked to her car, the fading light glinting on her hair. When she was gone, Margaret came to stand beside him, slipping her arm through his. She's changing, Margaret said. So am I, he replied. You think you'll forgive her someday? Maybe, he said. But forgiveness isn't the finish line, Mom. It's just the road. She nodded, her smile proud and sad all at once. Then keep walking. My boy, you're finally headed home. As they turned toward the car, Anna ran ahead, her laughter ringing through the twilight. The sky burned gold above East Point. And for the first time in a long time, Thomas Whitmore felt that the world imperfect, broken, and still beautiful, was worth rebuilding. The following days moved with a steady rhythm, the kind that builds quietly after a storm. Thomas spent each morning at the East Point Hope Center, sleeves rolled up, helping wherever he was needed. He taught kids to type, repaired the cracked ceiling, and sat in circles of laughter that reminded him of what success was supposed to feel like. At night, he came home to a warm dinner and Margaret's gentle humming, the house no longer echoing with silence. By the end of the week, word had spread about the center's revival. Local news stations started calling, curious about why one of Atlanta's wealthiest men was repainting classrooms with his own hands. Thomas declined every interview. "This isn't a headline," he told Denise. "It's a homecoming." On a crisp Thursday morning, Margaret joined him at the center, carrying a box of books from her church. "You can't grow minds without stories," she said proudly, setting them down on a shelf. Denise grinned. "You two are becoming our best volunteers." Margaret waved her off. "We're just doing what's right. That boy owes this place his heart." Thomas chuckled. "She's not wrong." Later that afternoon, Anna arrived after school, running straight into the computer lab. She wore her favorite blue dress, the one Evelyn had sewn years ago. "Daddy, look," she said, holding up a crumpled drawing. "I made our family at the center." He knelt to look closer. The picture showed 3 stick figures under a roof labeled Hope. There were small hearts around the words. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," he said softly. "You're quite the artist." "Oh, I learned from Grandma," she said proudly. "She told me every house is just a heart with a roof." Thomas smiled, the words sinking deep. As the day wound down, the last of the volunteers began packing up. Vanessa hadn't come by all week, but her absence no longer felt heavy. She had sent a short message 2 days earlier. "Thank you for letting me be part of something real." That was enough. When the last light dimmed and the doors were locked, Thomas drove his mother and daughter home through the glowing Atlanta dusk. Margaret dozed softly in the passenger seat, while Anna leaned against his arm, half asleep. Somewhere between the hum of tires and the rhythm of her breathing, Thomas realized this simple quiet was wealth. But peace, he knew, never stayed long without testing. The next morning, his phone buzzed before sunrise. Lauren, his assistant, texted, "Urgent. Company board meeting scheduled. Investors threaten to pull support unless you return." He exhaled slowly. The life he had walked away from was knocking again. At breakfast, Margaret noticed the tension in his eyes. "You got that look again," she said, pouring coffee. "They want me back at the company," he said. "Apparently, investors think I've lost focus." "Have you?" she asked. He shook his head. "No. I just found a different focus." Margaret sipped her coffee, thoughtful. "Then the question isn't what they want. It's what you can live with." By the time he arrived downtown, the skyscrapers loomed like judgment. His name, Whitmore Innovations, still gleamed across the top of the building, cold and proud. Inside, the boardroom buzzed with tension, suits, screens, and eyes full of calculation. "Thomas," said one of the board members, a man named Grant Reynolds. His voice clipped. "We're concerned. Your sudden absence, the media rumors about your charity project, it's causing instability." Thomas sat down calmly. "Instability?" Grant leaned forward. "You built this empire on efficiency and vision. Now people see you painting walls in the slums. That's not leadership. It's distraction." A ripple of agreement moved around the table. Thomas looked at them, his expression unreadable. "You know what I used to call leadership?" he said quietly. "Driving everyone to exhaustion in the name of growth. Measuring human worth by quarterly returns. You call that stability?" Grant frowned. "Thomas, this isn't about morality. It's about business." "No," Thomas said firmly. "It's always been about morality. We just stopped admitting it." The room fell silent. The air grew thick with discomfort. He stood, buttoning his jacket. "I'll make it simple. The company's fine. The profits are fine. But I'm not coming back, not like before. If you can't live with that, I'll resign." Gasps filled the room. "You'd walk away from billions?" someone muttered. Thomas smiled faintly. "Money was the only thing I never ran short of." "Meaning, on the other hand, that nearly cost me everything." Grant glared. "And what will you do instead? Run your little charity? Fix broken computers?" Thomas looked out the window at the city below. Maybe, he said softly. Maybe I'll fix broken people too. Starting with myself. No. With that, he walked out. The elevator ride down felt like freedom. When he stepped into the sunlight, Margaret's old saying echoed in his mind, "Peace doesn't live in marble walls." He understood it now. He'd built towers to feel tall, only to realize the tallest thing in his life had always been his mother's strength. That evening, he returned to East Point to find the center still alive with children. Denise waved from the courtyard. "Heard you made some big decisions today." Word travels fast," he said. "Good news does," she replied with a wink. "Bad news hides behind desks." He laughed, genuinely this time. "You ever thought about being a philosopher?" She shrugged. "I'm too busy being useful." Inside, he found Anna drawing on a chalkboard, while Margaret helped serve snacks. The smell of baked cornbread filled the air. He leaned against the doorway, watching them, his chest swelling with quiet pride. Margaret turned, noticing him. "You look lighter," she said. "I left some baggage downtown," he replied. She smiled. "Told you the view's better from down here." That night, after they got home, Thomas tucked Anna into bed. She blinked sleepily. "Daddy, are we poor now?" He laughed softly. "No, baby. We're just rich in a different way." She yawned, curling under the blanket. "Grandma says, rich people forget how to be nice." He brushed her hair gently. "Then we'll just have to remember extra hard." When she fell asleep, he sat by the window, watching the city lights in the distance. Somewhere out there, his old life still glittered loud, demanding, soulless. But here, in the quiet glow of a child's nightlight and the scent of cornbread in the hall, he felt richer than he ever had. Margaret appeared at the door, whispering, "You did good today, Thomas." He turned, smiling. "I finally quit the only job that never paid me right." She raised an eyebrow. "Which job was that?" "Pretending to be someone better than you raised me to be." Margaret's eyes softened. "Welcome home, son." Outside, a soft drizzle began to fall, gentle, forgiving, and familiar. For Thomas, the sound no longer echoed of sorrow. It was the rhythm of grace, and it was only just beginning. The morning rain gave way to a sky washed clean, soft light spilling through the kitchen window. Thomas stood by the counter, stirring sugar into his coffee, his thoughts calm and steady. The rhythm of life had found him again, not through success or control, but through something humbler, quieter. Margaret sat at the table reading the newspaper, her glasses perched low on her nose, while Anna colored in a notebook beside her. Margaret glanced up. "You made the front page again," she said, sliding the paper toward him. Thomas frowned. "Let me guess. Something about me walking away from the empire?" "Something about you walking toward something better," she corrected. The headline read, "Whitmore leaves fortune to build futures." Beneath it was a photo taken at the Hope Center, of him kneeling beside a child's desk, smiling in that rare, unposed way. He skimmed the article. It told the story of a billionaire who had turned his back on luxury to build a center for children in the very neighborhood he came from. For once, the words didn't sting. He set the paper down and smiled faintly. "They finally wrote something true," Margaret smiled back. "They did. But you still missed a comma in your life story, son." He chuckled. "And what's that supposed to mean?" "It means," she said, sipping her tea, "there's more to write. Don't stop here." Before he could respond, Anna looked up from her drawing. "Daddy, can I come with you to the Hope Center today? I want to show the kids my new crayons." "Oh, of course, sweetheart," he said, bending down to kiss her head. "You're my best helper." That afternoon, the three of them returned to East Point. The center buzzed with weekend energy families gathering for a small community fair Denise had organized. Booths lined the yard selling baked goods, homemade crafts, and lemonade. Local musicians played old soul tunes that drifted across the street. Thomas carried boxes of supplies from his truck, waving to familiar faces as he went. People no longer looked at him as an untouchable figure. Now, they saw him as one of their own. "Mr. Whitmore," a teenager called out. It was the same boy from weeks ago, the one who'd first asked why a billionaire would fix a basketball court. We fixed up the roof like you said. No more leaks. Thomas smiled proudly. That's great work. You just saved a lot of wet heads. The boy grinned. We even started tutoring the little ones. Miss Denise said we're mentors now. That's exactly what you are, Thomas said warmly. Keep going. This place belongs to you too. Across the courtyard, Margaret helped serve lemonade with a group of church ladies, laughing so hard her shoulders shook. Anna ran from booth to booth, her curls bouncing, a tiny streak of joy weaving through the crowd. For the first time in years, Thomas felt no ache in his chest, no ghost whispering what he should have done differently. Everything, somehow, had led here to this patch of cracked concrete blooming with laughter. By late afternoon, Denise approached him with a clipboard in hand. Thomas, we need a speaker for the closing hour. Folks want to hear from the man who made all this possible. He shook his head, smiling. I didn't make it possible. I just opened the door. She raised an eyebrow. Still, they need to hear what's on the other side of that door. He sighed but nodded. All right. I'll try not to bore them. As the sun dipped low, families gathered near the small stage. The music faded, and Denise introduced him. A man who left the towers of wealth to build bridges of compassion, Mr. Thomas Whitmore. He stepped forward, microphone in hand, the crowd's applause humbling. He looked over the faces, mothers, fathers, children, neighbors all shining, with something that had nothing to do with money. I used to think success meant reaching higher than anyone else, he began. But I was wrong. Success is what happens when you reach back and pull someone up with you. The crowd quieted, leaning in. I built skyscrapers that touched clouds, he continued. But none of them reached my mother's heart. I made more money than I could ever spend. Yet I starved for something simple: connection. And it took losing almost everything to learn that compassion isn't charity. It's survival. He paused, scanning the crowd until his eyes met Margaret's. She nodded softly, pride glimmering in her smile. When I was a kid, he said, his voice steady but tender, I watched my mother work 3 jobs just to keep me fed. I promised her I'd give her a life where she'd never have to struggle again. And I did, but I forgot that love doesn't live in houses or cars. It lives right here. He pressed a hand to his chest. And if we don't take care of it, we end up with nothing but walls and windows. Applause rippled through the crowd. Thomas smiled gently. So if you ever wonder what you're worth, don't look at your paycheck. Look at the faces around you. The ones you lift up, that's your legacy. When he stepped down, Anna ran to him, hugging his leg. Daddy, everyone was clapping for you. He laughed, lifting her into his arms. No, sweetheart. They were clapping for all of us. Denise came over, wiping her eyes. You've got a preacher's heart, Thomas. He smiled. No, just a son's. As dusk deepened into evening, lanterns glowed along the fences. Margaret sat with the neighborhood elders, humming an old hymn while children danced nearby. Thomas watched them all, his soul at rest. Then, as the music softened, Vanessa appeared near the edge of the crowd. She hadn't come close, just stood there, half in the shadow, watching. Their eyes met briefly. She gave a faint nod, her expression peaceful. Then she turned and walked away, disappearing into the glow of the streetlights. Thomas exhaled, a quiet release of something that had lingered too long. Margaret joined him, her voice soft. She's finding her way too. He nodded. We all are. They stood there together, mother and son, as the lights of East Point flickered like stars against the dark. When they returned home that night, Thomas tucked Anna into bed. She murmured sleepily, Daddy, are you happy now? He smiled. Yes, baby. I think I finally am. Margaret stood by the doorway, her eyes warm. You did good today, my son. He looked at her, his voice low but sure. No, Mom. We did. Outside, the night settled soft and quiet. Rain clouds drifted far off beyond the city, leaving the world washed clean just like him. The next morning dawned soft and gray. the kind of quiet light that made the world feel unhurried. The storm had passed during the night, leaving beads of rain clinging to the rose bushes outside the kitchen window. Margaret was already awake, humming to herself as she flipped pancakes. The scent of butter and maple filled the air. Thomas entered, still in his robe, his hair tousled. "You're up early again," he said, reaching for a cup of coffee. "Old habits," Margaret replied with a smile. "You learn not to waste the good hours when life finally slows down." Anna came running in, dragging her blanket like a cape. "Grandma, Daddy, I dreamed we built a castle out of pancakes." Thomas chuckled, sitting her on a chair. "If anyone could make that happen, it's you two." Margaret slid a golden pancake onto Anna's plate. "Dreams are just plans waiting for hands," she said. They ate together, the morning light soft on their faces. Thomas watched them, feeling a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. These simple breakfasts were the small miracles he'd forgotten to notice for years. After breakfast, Margaret announced she had errands to run with a church friend. Thomas offered to drive her, but she waved him off. "I've been catching buses since before you had hair, boy. You stay here with your daughter." He smiled. "Yes, ma'am." When she left, the house fell into a rare kind of stillness. Anna climbed into his lap with her coloring book, pressing her small hand over his. "Daddy, can we go to the center later? I want to show my friends my new crayons." Of course," he said, kissing her hair. "But first, how about we take a little walk?" They walked through the neighborhood hand in hand. The sidewalk still glistened with last night's rain, and the air smelled of wet earth and magnolia. Neighbors greeted him warmly, something he was still learning to accept. One older man watering his lawn called out, "Mornin', Mr. Whitmore. Heard you're making real change down there in East Point." Thomas smiled modestly. "Trying my best." The man nodded. "That's all the Lord ever asked of us." By noon, they reached the small park at the edge of town. It was where Thomas had proposed to Evelyn years ago, before the fame and fortune. The same oak tree still stood tall, its trunk wider now, roots strong and deep. He lifted Anna onto a swing and gave her a gentle push. "Daddy, did you play here when you were little?" she asked. "Not here," he said softly, "but I brought someone special once. Your mom." Anna tilted her heel. "You mean my other mom? The one in the pictures?" "Yes," he said. "She was kind, and she loved you before you were even born." Anna's eyes sparkled with curiosity. "Do you think she can see us?" Thomas smiled faintly. "I like to think she never stopped." They stayed there for a while, the quiet punctuated by Anna's laughter and the creak of the swing. Thomas felt Evelyn's presence like sunlight, gentle, forgiving. He didn't believe in ghosts, but he believed in love that never faded, and that felt like the same thing. When they finally reached the Hope Center later that afternoon, it was bustling. Volunteers were sorting supplies, kids were painting, and Denise was giving instructions like a drill sergeant with a heart of gold. "Look who's here," Denise called. "Our favorite father-daughter duo." Anna ran straight to the art corner, waving her crayons like trophies. Thomas walked to the back office where new donations were being tallied. Denise followed him in. "Got something to show you," she said, handing him a folder. Inside was a proposal from a regional foundation, offering to fund a permanent expansion of the Hope Center. Thomas's eyes widened. This could change everything," Denise nodded. "They want you to head the initiative, not as a donor, but as the director." He blinked. "Director?" "Denise, I've never even run a nonprofit." She smirked. "You've run an empire. You'll figure it out." He leaned back, silent for a moment. "It's strange," he said finally. "I used to dream about expanding companies. Now, all I want is to expand compassion." Denise smiled. "Then you're already qualified." Out in the courtyard, Anna was showing her friends how to blend colors on a canvas. Margaret had arrived by then, sitting nearby with a cup of lemonade, watching her granddaughter's small fingers move like a conductor's. When Thomas came out to join them, she looked up, her eyes proud. "What's that grin for?" she asked. He handed her the folder. "Looks like the Hope Center is getting bigger." She opened it, scanning the pages. "And you're running it?" "Looks that way." She chuckled softly. Funny how God works. You built skyscrapers for years, and now he's got you building hearts instead. He laughed quietly. He has a better business plan. Margaret nodded toward Anna. You see her, Thomas? That's what legacy looks like. Not marble or money. Just the light you pass on. Thomas followed her gaze. Anna had finished her painting a large heart surrounded by small, bright faces. Across the top, she had written in crooked letters, "Love builds everything." The words hit him harder than any speech or award ever had. That evening, after locking up the center, they all walked home together. The sun dipped low, painting the streets gold. Margaret's hand rested lightly on his arm, and Anna skipped ahead, chasing the fading light. You look at peace, Margaret said softly. I think I am, he replied. I used to think my story ended with loss. But now, I see it was just the middle. Margaret smiled. Every good story needs a middle. That's where the heart learns how to keep beating. When they reached home, Thomas tucked Anna into bed. She held her painting tightly, refusing to let it go. Daddy, she whispered sleepily, when I grow up, I want to help people too. He smiled. You already are, sweetheart. After she drifted to sleep, he joined Margaret on the porch. The night was clear, stars scattered like old promises across the sky. She's her mother's child, Margaret said softly. He nodded. And yours too. They sat in silence, the hum of crickets filling the air. For once, Thomas didn't think about tomorrow or yesterday. He just listened to the sound of the world finally breathing with him. And somewhere deep inside, he knew this was what redemption really felt like. Not dramatic, not loud. Just quiet peace that stayed. Sunday came with the scent of magnolia drifting through the open windows. The morning was still, almost holy in its calm. Thomas stood in front of the mirror adjusting his shirt collar, not the expensive kind he used to wear, but a plain one neatly pressed, soft at the edges. He looked different now, leaner, older somehow, but lighter. Margaret entered behind him, fixing a small flower in her hat. You clean up nice, Mr. Director, she teased, a grin tugging at her lips. He chuckled. You sound prouder than the pastor today. I'm proud of you every day, she said simply. But this one's special. The church wants to honor you. Don't argue with Grace. Anna skipped into the room wearing a bright yellow dress, her hair tied with ribbons. Grandma says you're getting a shiny plaque. Thomas laughed. I think that's just fancy talk for a piece of wood, sweetheart. It means they like you, she said matter-of-factly. He smiled. Then that's all I need. They drove together to the old neighborhood church on Glenwood Avenue, the same one where Margaret had once cleaned floors to make ends meet. Its white paint was peeling, but its stained glass windows still glowed like jewels in the morning Sunday. Inside, the pews were full, the air alive with the low hum of gospel music and whispered greetings. When they entered, the congregation turned. Smiles, nods, even a few handshakes reached out to them. Margaret led Anna to the front pew while Thomas stood for a moment, taking it all in the scent of old wood, the creak of benches, the warmth of familiarity. It had been decades since he'd sat here, but nothing felt foreign. The pastor, a tall man with silver hair and a voice like thunder wrapped in velvet, approached the pulpit. Brothers and sisters, he began, today we celebrate something rare, a man who walked away from the world's riches to rediscover his soul. Thomas felt a flush rise to his face. He didn't want applause. But when it came, it was gentle, sincere. The pastor continued, Thomas Whitmore, you were once known for building towers that touch the sky. Now you build hearts that touch heaven. The crowd murmured amen. When it was his turn to speak, Thomas rose slowly and walked to the front. The old wood floor creaked under his steps, each sound reminding him of where he'd come from. He stood before the microphone, scanning the faces, neighbors, former teachers, children from the Hope Center, and his mother, smiling like she had known all along he would find his way home. I don't deserve your kindness, he began quietly. I only did what I should have done long ago. His voice trembled, but he steadied it. When I was a boy, my mother told me God doesn't measure a man by what he builds, but by what he rebuilds. I didn't understand that until I broke everything that mattered. I chased success, thinking it would fill the spaces love left behind. But money can't comfort a child at night. It can't hold your mother's hand. It can't forgive you. He paused, the room silent except for the rustle of someone's handkerchief. I thought I was powerful, but real power, he glanced toward Margaret, is the grace that forgives you before you deserve it. My mother taught me that. My daughter reminds me of it every day, and if I have one prayer left, it's that I'll never forget the sound of their laughter in the place that almost forgot how to love. The congregation rose to their feet. The applause this time wasn't loud, it was reverent. The pastor stepped forward and placed a hand on his shoulder. You came home, son. That's all God ever asked of any of us. After the service, they gathered outside under the oak trees where sunlight flickered through the leaves. Children chased one another across the grass, their joy infectious. Denise arrived from the Hope Center, waving as she approached. Your speech made half the church cry, she said, grinning. And the other half wants to volunteer. Thomas laughed. Then I'd say it was a success. Margaret handed him a plate of cornbread from the potluck table. Eat before you start saving the world again. Anna tugged at his hand. Daddy, can we go show Grandma the mural at the center after this? Of course, he said. Lead the way, boss. By late afternoon, they arrived at the Hope Center. The children had painted a massive mural on the side of the building. 3 figures. An older woman, a man, and a small child, standing hand in hand beneath a bright Sunday. Across the top were the words, "Home is built, not bought." Thomas stared at it for a long time, his throat tight. Who came up with that? He asked softly. Denise smiled. Your daughter. She said it in class, and the kids ran with it. Margaret chuckled, wiping at her eyes. She's a smart one. Got her grandma's wisdom. And her father's heart, Denise added. Thomas knelt, tracing the words gently with his fingertips. The paint was still a little wet, the colors vibrant. It's beautiful, he whispered. She understood before I did. That evening, they stayed at the center long after sunset. Margaret led a small prayer circle in the courtyard, thanking God for second chances. The children sang softly, their voices blending with the hum of crickets. Anna sat in her father's lap, half asleep, the mural glowing faintly behind them under the string lights. Daddy, she murmured, eyes fluttering closed. Do you think Mommy can see the mural too? He looked toward the stars, his voice tender. I think she helped paint it, sweetheart. When she drifted off, Margaret placed a blanket around her shoulders and smiled at him. You've done more than build a center, Thomas. You've built peace. He nodded, his heart full. And it only took a lifetime to learn what that means. They sat there together beneath the wide Georgia sky, the night alive with warmth and song. And though the world beyond the fence would keep spinning with ambition and noise, in that small corner of East Point, love had made its home, and it wasn't leaving again. Monday dawned slow and golden, sunlight slanting through the kitchen blinds in long, soft stripes. The smell of oatmeal and cinnamon filled the air. Margaret hummed her usual morning hymn as Anna perched at the table, swinging her legs, her curls catching the light. Thomas sat nearby, laptop open, scrolling through designs for the Hope Center's new expansion. He looked different now, his hair peppered with gray, his face calmer, lined with earned peace. We've got 3 potential blueprints, he said, half to himself. A library, a small auditorium, maybe even a garden space. Margaret glanced over her glasses. You're talking like a man planning to stay. He smiled faintly. Maybe I am. Anna looked up, curious. What's a blueprint? Thomas laughed. It's like a drawing that shows how something will look before it's built. So, a dream on paper? She asked. Margaret chuckled. Exactly that, baby girl. Thomas stared at her for a moment, his heart swelling. A dream on paper, he repeated softly. That's the perfect way to put it. The morning was peaceful until the doorbell rang. Thomas frowned. They weren't expecting anyone. He opened the door to find a man in a dark suit holding a sleek folder. His voice was polite, but crisp. Mr. Whitmore, I represent your former partners at Whitmore Innovations. They'd like to speak about a potential acquisition of your remaining shares. Thomas stepped outside, closing the door behind him. They've already got more than enough of the company, he said evenly. The man nodded. True. But with your name attached, public trust remains strong. They'd like to retain your endorsement, an honorary return. No obligations, just visibility. There's a generous offer. Thomas smiled thinly. You mean they want me to sell my face back to them? Let's just say they're willing to pay handsomely for your goodwill. He studied the man for a long moment, then said quietly, I think I already spent my goodwill somewhere better. The man hesitated. You're sure? This would secure your daughter's future. Thomas's eyes hardened slightly. Her future isn't for sale. He handed the folder back and closed the door. Inside, Margaret was wiping her hands on a towel, watching him. Another storm trying to blow through. He nodded. Same wind, different direction. What'd you tell them? That I'm done trading pieces of my soul for comfort. She smiled proudly. Then the storm just passed. By noon, he and Anna headed to the Hope Center. Margaret stayed behind, saying she'd catch up later after her church meeting. The drive through East Point was familiar now, street vendors calling out greetings, children waving from sidewalks. When they pulled up, the building was buzzing with activity. Volunteers were hanging banners for the new outreach program. Denise greeted them near the entrance. We've got visitors today, local donors and a city councilwoman. They want to see what we've built. Thomas nodded. Then let's show them something worth remembering. The visitors arrived shortly after, a small group dressed in suits and bright dresses. The councilwoman, Mrs. Howard, shook his hand warmly. Mr. Whitmore, we've heard about your work. This community owes you gratitude. He smiled modestly. It's not mine alone. This belongs to everyone here. She nodded approvingly. Still, it's rare to see a man of your means so involved. We're considering a city grant for programs like this one. Your leadership could help us expand across Atlanta. Thomas hesitated. I'm honored. But leadership isn't what this place needs. It needs listeners. The woman studied him curiously. You'd turn down influence? He looked around the children learning at computers, the laughter spilling from the art room, Margaret's old hymn echoing faintly in the background. If influence means forgetting why I started, yes, Mrs. Howard smiled. Then maybe you're exactly the kind of leader this city needs. After the meeting, Thomas walked out to the garden space behind the center. Anna was kneeling in the dirt, planting small yellow flowers with a few other children. Daddy, she said proudly, we're making the ground happy. He crouched beside her, chuckling. Looks like you're doing a good job. One of the little boys looked up. Miss Denise said these flowers are for people who don't have anyone to remember them. Thomas felt something tighten in his chest. That's a beautiful reason. Yeah, the boy said with a grin. But it's also messy. I got mud in my shoes. Thomas laughed softly. That's how you know you're doing it right. As the children ran off, Anna stayed by the flower bed, patting the soil with care. Daddy, can we plant one for Mommy? He paused, his throat tight. Yes, he said softly. Let's give her the biggest one. They planted a single bright marigold. Anna pressed the dirt around it with her small hands. Now she can see it from heaven, she whispered. He swallowed hard. She'll love it. The sun dipped low by evening, painting the walls of the Hope Center in gold. Margaret arrived then, holding a small brown envelope. Mail came for you, she said. Thomas opened it. It was a handwritten letter from Vanessa. Just a single page. Thomas, thank you for keeping your promise to love the world even when it didn't love you back. I've joined a shelter project in Savannah. I think I finally understand what you were trying to teach me. Tell Margaret I'm sorry. And tell Anna, I'll pray for her every day. He folded the letter slowly, his eyes misting. She's finding her way. Margaret nodded. You helped her start walking again. That's enough. As twilight settled, the three of them sat outside the Hope Center. The lights flickered on, warm against the dusk. Anna climbed into his lap, drowsy from the day. Daddy, she murmured, Can we come back tomorrow? He smiled, holding her close. Every day if you want. Margaret looked out at the horizon, where the first stars began to shine. You know, Thomas, she said softly. When you were little, I prayed that you'd build something that lasted. I just didn't know it would look like this. He followed her gaze toward the glowing windows of the Hope Center. It's not built yet, he said quietly. But it's standing on love. That's a good foundation. Margaret smiled, the only kind that never cracks. The night deepened around them, the hum of crickets mixing with distant laughter. For Thomas, the past no longer pulled, only the present, vast and alive. Tuesday began with the kind of light that seemed to bless everything it touched. The sun slipped gently through the curtains, spilling across the polished wooden floor. Margaret's gospel record played softly in the background, crackling, warm, familiar. Thomas stood by the window, sipping coffee, watching Anna chase a butterfly across the yard. It had been months since he left Whitmore Innovations, and the world had grown smaller in the best possible way. His phone no longer buzzed with meetings or mergers. Instead, it lit up with photos from the Hope Center, smiling faces, new volunteers, art projects blooming on every wall. Margaret appeared in the doorway, tying her apron. You keep looking out there like you're waiting on something. Thomas smiled faintly. Maybe I am. What's that, son? A sign that this peace isn't temporary. She chuckled softly. Peace is never permanent, baby. That's why it's precious. Before he could reply, Anna burst into the room, holding a folded paper. Daddy, look, I wrote something. He took it gently, unfolding the crayon-scrawled note. It read, "The Hope Center is where hearts get fixed." He blinked, smiling. That's beautiful, sweetheart. Margaret leaned over his shoulder, reading aloud. Out of the mouths of babes, she murmured, eyes shining. Later that morning, they drove to the Hope Center for a staff meeting. Denise had gathered everyone in the main hall. Papers scattered across a long table. All right, team, she said, big news. The city approved our grant for expansion. We're officially building a second wing. Applause filled the room. Thomas couldn't help smiling. That's incredible, Denise. She nodded. You're the one who started this fire, Whitmore. Now it's spreading in the best way. As plans unfolded, Margaret helped organize the new kitchen program, while Anna sat drawing blueprints of her own, a playground shaped like a heart, with flowers growing through it. So kids can play inside love, she explained when asked. That phrase lingered in Thomas's mind all afternoon. Play inside love. He wished every adult could remember what that meant. Around noon, a familiar face appeared at the door. Lauren, his former assistant, stood there holding a box. She looked nervous but smiled when she saw him. Mr. Whitmore, Thomas. I hope I'm not interrupting. Lauren, he said warmly. You haven't called me that in months. How are you? Good, she said softly. Actually, better. I left the company too. It wasn't the same after you resigned. The new leadership, well, let's just say compassion didn't make the quarterly goals. He nodded with understanding. I know that feeling too well. I wanted to give you this, she said, handing him the box. Inside were photos, framed articles, old awards, remnants of a life that once defined him. I thought you might want these back. He looked through them quietly. His first contract. His first office. The cover story that once called him the visionary of tomorrow. He closed the lid and smiled gently. Thank you, Lauren, but I think I'll leave them here, maybe for the kids' library. Let them see that success isn't about where you end up, but what you learn along the way. Lauren smiled, tears in her eyes. You've changed, Thomas. He nodded. No. I just finally became who I was supposed to be. Before leaving, she glanced toward Margaret, who was helping children set the lunch tables. You're lucky, she said softly. Most men spend their whole lives trying to find what you have right here. I know, he replied, looking at his mother, and that's why I'm never leaving it again. By late afternoon, the Hope Center buzzed with the sound of hammers and laughter as volunteers began preparing for the expansion. Thomas joined in, hauling lumber with a few men from the neighborhood. They worked until the sun started dipping low, sweat glistening under the golden light. At one point, An older volunteer, a quiet man named Elijah, paused to wipe his brow. "You know, Mr. Whitmore," he said, "I used to think you were just another rich man trying to buy forgiveness." Thomas smiled, unoffended. "You wouldn't be the first to think that," Elijah nodded. "Maybe not. But you stayed. Most folks like you drop a check and disappear. You came back every day, same as the rest of us." Thomas looked at the half-built frame of the new wing and said quietly, "If I ever disappeared again, I'd lose myself." That evening, Margaret brought lemonade for everyone, and Anna handed out cookies she had baked with a little too much sugar, but no one complained. The laughter rose over the sound of saws and chatter, filling the yard with something sacred. As the day ended, Thomas stood watching the volunteers clean up, the last light spilling across their faces. Margaret joined him, her hands clasped before her. "You see that, Thomas? That's what a life rebuilt looks like." He nodded. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" "More than beautiful," she said softly. "It's honest." On their drive home, the car was quiet. Anna fell asleep in the back seat, clutching her crayon note. Margaret looked out the window, her reflection faint in the glass. "You ever think about what comes next?" she asked. Thomas glanced at her. "Every day." "And?" He smiled faintly. "I think I want to build more centers across the state. Maybe across the country. Not as a billionaire, just as a man who remembers what hunger feels like." Margaret nodded slowly, pride softening her features. "That's a good dream, son. The kind that feeds more than one soul." When they reached home, he carried Anna inside, tucked her into bed, and sat quietly beside her for a while. The marigold she had planted for her mother sat in a small vase by the window, its petals glowing in the moonlight. He whispered softly, "I hope you see her, Evelyn. She's everything you dreamed she'd be." Margaret's voice came from the doorway. "She does, Thomas. Love doesn't die, it just changes rooms." He looked at her and smiled. "You always know the right thing to say. That's because I've lived long enough to run out of wrong ones." He laughed softly. Later, after she went to bed, Thomas stepped onto the porch. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of fresh rain and distant honeysuckle. The city glimmered faintly on the horizon, but it no longer called to him. The only light he needed was right here in the windows of his home, in the laughter of his mother and daughter, in the quiet rhythm of redemption finally complete. Wednesday morning arrived with a cool breeze drifting in through the open kitchen window. The world outside smelled of rain-soaked earth and jasmine, the kind of scent that makes you slow down without meaning to. Margaret was seated at the table peeling apples for a pie, her movements unhurried, graceful. Thomas poured her a cup of tea and set it in front of her. "You spoil me too much," she said, smiling. He laughed softly. "After all these years, I'm still catching up." She looked up at him with that knowing tenderness only a mother can have. "Catching up isn't about the things you do, son. It's about staying long enough to mean them." He nodded, tucking the words away like a keepsake. Anna came in a few minutes later, her hands cupped carefully around something. "Daddy, look," she said, opening her palms. A small butterfly with yellow wings rested there. It was on the porch, cold. "I think it needed help," Margaret smiled. "Seems we got another Whitmore who can't resist fixing broken things." Anna grinned. "I just gave it a place to rest." Thomas watched her carry the butterfly to the window, releasing it gently. It fluttered out into the sunlight, free and alive. "She's learning the right kind of wealth," he said quietly. That afternoon, Thomas drove back to the Hope Center to meet with a team of engineers about the expansion. The new building would have classrooms, a garden, and a reading space named the Grace Wing in honor of his mother. Margaret had protested when she heard about it, claiming she didn't need her name on a wall. But Thomas had smiled and said, "It's not for you, Mom. It's for every mother who gave more than she had." The meeting lasted hours. Plans, budgets, and timelines covered the table. When it ended, Denise approached him with her clipboard. "Thomas, there's one more thing. The mayor's office wants you to speak at the city fundraiser next week. They're featuring local projects that changed lives." He hesitated. "You know I'm not much for microphones." Denise crossed her arms. Maybe not, but the world still listens to your voice. You can use it for something good this time. He smiled wryly. You're starting to sound like my mother. She winked. That's how you know I'm right. That evening, as the sky turned lavender, Thomas walked the grounds of the Hope Center alone. Children's drawings fluttered in the windows, laughter still echoing faintly from the courtyard. He paused by the marigold Anna had planted for Evelyn, now taller, blooming bright even in the dimming light. He knelt beside it, brushing a petal with his finger. I wish you could see her, he murmured. She's everything we hoped for. A soft voice broke through his thoughts. Talking to the flowers again? He turned. Margaret was standing a few feet away, arms folded, eyes full of warmth. Old habits, he said, smiling. You caught me. She walked over, joining him by the flower bed. You've built something beautiful here, Thomas. Not just for them, for yourself, too. He looked around at the soft lights glowing from the windows. It's strange, he said quietly. I used to chase success so I could feel alive. Now I just need a place where others can breathe. Margaret nodded. That's what real living is, making room for someone else to breathe. As they walked back toward the car, Denise ran up to them. Hey, Thomas almost forgot to tell you. That young volunteer, Elijah, he's been accepted to Georgia Tech. Full scholarship. Said he wrote his essay about you. Thomas stopped in his tracks, caught off guard. About me? Denise nodded. Said he wrote that sometimes the richest man in the room is the one willing to listen. For a long moment, Thomas couldn't speak. Margaret placed a gentle hand on his arm. That's your harvest, son. When they got home, Anna was already asleep, curled up with her drawing pad. On the page was a new picture, a house with flowers all around and 3 smiling figures inside. Above it, in uneven letters, she had written, Home is where love works. Margaret picked up the drawing and smiled softly. She's got your heart and my handwriting. Thomas chuckled. A dangerous combination. Later that night, after Margaret went to bed, Thomas sat on the porch. A soft rain beginning to fall again. The world seemed quieter than usual. The city hum fading into the distance. He thought about the fundraiser, about Elijah, about all the lives intersecting in ways he never could have planned. He remembered the day he found his mother and daughter in the rain, how helpless he'd felt, how blind success had made him. Now that memory wasn't just pain. It was a reminder of where mercy began. He whispered into the night, Thank you for the storm that brought me home. A faint clap of thunder rolled somewhere far away, almost like an answer. The next morning, Thomas found Margaret in the garden, trimming the marigolds. You were up early, he said, handing her coffee. She smiled. Couldn't sleep. Too much joy in my bones. He laughed. That's a good problem to have. She looked at him for a long moment, her gaze soft and wise. Thomas, do you know what the best part of growing old is? He shook his head. What? Watching your children finally understand what you tried to teach them their whole lives. He exhaled, smiling. Then I guess I'm late to class. But I'm learning fast. Margaret nodded, her eyes misting. You've learned everything that matters. The two of them stood together under the morning sun, surrounded by flowers, the faint scent of cinnamon still in the air from yesterday's pie. And for the first time since the day everything fell apart, Thomas Whitmore knew deep in his soul nothing was missing anymore. Thursday morning came bright and clear, the kind of morning that carried a quiet joy even before the coffee was poured. The world outside was glistening from the night's soft rain. Margaret sat on the porch in her robe, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, watching the street come alive, neighbors sweeping sidewalks, children waiting for the school bus, birds arguing in the trees. Thomas stepped out beside her, holding 2 steaming mugs. Morning, Mom. She smiled, taking the cup. Morning, baby. You heading to the Hope Center again? He nodded, settling in beside her. We've got the contractors coming to break ground for the new wing. Your daddy would have loved seeing this, she said softly, staring at the garden. He always said the best men build something that lasts beyond them. Thomas looked toward the horizon, the first streaks of sunlight touching the rooftops. I used to think that meant buildings and legacies. Now I know it means people. Margaret chuckled. Took you long enough to figure that out. Guess I needed the hard road, he said, smiling. When they arrived at the Hope Center later that morning, the lot buzzed with activity. Trucks rumbled, workers unloaded lumber, and a small crowd of children gathered behind a makeshift barrier, their eyes wide with curiosity. Denise stood near the foundation markers, waving them over. Morning, boss man, she said teasingly. Thomas laughed. If you keep calling me that, I'll start charging for autographs. Please, she snorted. You'd probably sign a check instead. They both laughed, the kind of easy humor that comes from shared labor. Margaret helped set up refreshments while Anna ran off with a few of the kids, already smudging her dress with dirt. As the first shovels hit the ground, Thomas felt something stir in him, a sense of renewal that had nothing to do with wealth or pride. It was humility, solid and grounding. The Hope Center's new wing would serve hundreds of families, and every nail driven into that soil would remind him of where he began. Later in the afternoon, while the workers took a break, an older man approached him. His clothes were worn, his face tired but kind. Mr. Whitmore? He asked. Thomas turned. Yes, sir. I'm Samuel Price. I used to work security at your company downtown. Years back. Thomas blinked, trying to place him. You were at the Peachtree building, right? Samuel nodded. That's me. I got laid off after the restructuring. Things went bad after that, lost the house. My wife passed. I've been sleeping in the shelter down the street for a while now. But I heard what you're doing here, and I wanted to say thank you. Thomas's chest tightened. Samuel, I'm sorry. I had no idea. Samuel smiled faintly. You couldn't have known. But seeing you out here, it gives a man hope. Maybe I could help out? Volunteer? Keep the place safe? Thomas placed a hand on his shoulder. Samuel, you don't owe me anything. But if you want to be part of this, we'd be lucky to have you. The man's eyes glistened. Thank you, sir. Means more than you know. Margaret had been watching from a few feet away. When Samuel walked off, she came to stand beside her son. You see? God keeps sending you chances to make right what you didn't even know was broken. He nodded slowly. I just hope I don't waste any of them. You won't, she said, patting his arm. You finally stopped leading with pride. That's half the battle. By late afternoon, the groundbreaking ceremony was done. Reporters had shown up despite Thomas's request for privacy. But this time, he didn't shy away. When one asked, Mr. Whitmore, why dedicate this new wing to your mother? He simply smiled. Because everything I've ever learned about success came from her hands, he said. And those hands never stopped giving. Even when they were empty. The crowd fell quiet for a moment. Margaret's eyes glistened with quiet pride, though she shook her head and muttered, That boy knows how to embarrass his mama in public. That night, back home, the three of them sat around the dinner table. Anna talked non-stop about the new playground designs while Margaret listened, her laughter filling the room. When Anna ran off to play, Margaret turned to Thomas. You look tired, but happy. I am, he said softly. Today felt like purpose, she smiled. Purpose is better than peace. Peace just sits still, purpose moves. He chuckled. Then I guess I'll keep moving. After dinner, Margaret went to bed early, leaving Thomas alone on the porch. The crickets sang softly in the yard, and the moon hung full above the magnolia trees. He thought about Samuel, about the workers, about all the people whose lives were quietly crossing paths because of one storm years ago. He took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill his lungs. For the first time, he realized his life wasn't divided anymore. There was no before and after. There was only now. And now was good. Inside, Anna's laughter echoed faintly from her room. Margaret's soft snore drifted down the hall. Thomas smiled to himself. This was wealth, this stillness, this warmth, this love that asked for nothing in return. He whispered into the night, Thank you, Lord, for teaching me the value of small things. And as the wind rustled the trees, it sounded almost like an answer. Friday morning came with the soft smell of dew and fried bacon drifting through the house. Margaret was already humming an old hymn as she worked over the stove, while Anna sat on the counter swinging her legs, her curls tied up with a bright blue ribbon. Thomas leaned against the doorway, smiling as he watched them. "Smells like heaven in here," he said. Margaret glanced back, spatula in hand. "Heaven's busy, but this'll do for now." Anna giggled. "Grandma says bacon keeps sadness away." Thomas laughed. She might be right. They ate together at the small wooden table, the same one where they'd shared so many quiet mornings since leaving the mansion behind. The air was light with laughter, but somewhere in Thomas's mind, he felt a faint unease. Something was tugging at him. When breakfast was done, he kissed Margaret on the cheek and said, "I'm going to head to the center early. We've got a few inspections to handle." Margaret looked up from her coffee. "All right, baby. Just don't forget we're meeting Pastor Harris this evening. He wants to bless the new wing before it opens." "Wouldn't miss it," he said, grabbing his jacket. The drive through East Point was peaceful, the sunlight warming the brick walls and freshly painted fences. But as Thomas neared the Hope Center, he noticed a group of people standing near the entrance reporters, cameras flashing. His stomach tightened. Denise was at the door, her expression tense. "Morning, Thomas," she said quickly. "You might want to brace yourself." He frowned. "What's going on?" She handed him a folded newspaper. The headline read, "Former Billionaire's Charity, Under Scrutiny, Possible Misuse of Funds." Thomas stared at it, disbelief flashing through him. "What is this nonsense?" Denise exhaled sharply. "Apparently, one of your old investors, Green, claimed the Hope Center's funding came from untraceable personal accounts. They're implying this was some elaborate PR stunt." He rubbed his forehead, trying to stay calm. "Green's been bitter ever since I refused to return to the company. He'd sell a lie just to buy an audience." "I know," Denise said, lowering her voice. "But people listen to money. We'll need to prove them wrong." "Oh," Thomas folded the paper and set it down, steadying his voice. "We will. I'm not letting them turn this into another corporate headline." By afternoon, the story had spread online. Messages flooded his phone, former colleagues offering half-hearted sympathy, journalists requesting comments. But amid the noise came one message that mattered. "Don't lose your peace, son. Truth walks slower than lies, but it always arrives." It was from Margaret. He read it twice, then smiled. Hours later, while reviewing the financial reports with Denise, Anna appeared in the doorway holding a crayon drawing. "Daddy," she said softly, "people outside are saying bad things. Are we in trouble?" Thomas knelt to meet her eyes. "No, sweetheart. Sometimes people don't understand good things right away. But the truth always shines through." She nodded slowly. "Like the sun after rain?" He smiled. "Exactly like that." That evening, as the sun dipped low, the small crowd gathered for Pastor Harris's blessing. Despite the swirling rumors, the community showed up: neighbors, volunteers, children. Margaret stood beside Thomas, her hand resting on his arm. The pastor began to speak, his voice rich and deep. "When a man builds something with love, the world may question it, but love doesn't need permission to do good." A murmur of agreement passed through the crowd. Thomas exhaled, feeling a knot loosen in his chest. After the prayer, Samuel, the former security guard turned volunteer, stepped forward, holding a small envelope. "Mr. Whitmore, the kids wanted you to have this," he said. Thomas opened it. Inside was a card covered in crooked handwriting. "Thank you for giving us a place to belong." Beneath it were dozens of children's names. Margaret looked up at him, her eyes soft. "There's your proof right there." He smiled, his throat tightening. "Better than any accountant's report." Just then, a car pulled up at the edge of the lot. A woman stepped out, elegant, familiar. Vanessa. She looked thinner, humbler somehow. Her hair tied back, her clothes simple. The crowd turned as she walked toward him, carrying a folder. "I came to make things right," she said quietly. "I know people think you misused funds, but I kept records from when I managed your estate. I can prove every donation was clean." Thomas blinked. Stunne. Vanessa, why help me now? Her voice trembled. Because I did enough harm already. You don't deserve another storm. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Thank you. Margaret stepped closer, her voice calm but kind. You're welcome to join us tonight, child. The past doesn't get to own you forever. Vanessa's eyes glistened. I don't deserve that, Grace. Margaret smiled gently. None of us do. That's why it's Grace. The three of them stood there as the last rays of sun touched the new foundation stones. The air was heavy with peace, the kind that follows forgiveness, not fanfare. When the blessing ended, the crowd lingered in quiet joy. Denise whispered, We'll get the truth out by tomorrow morning. Once the records are verified, that story won't stand a chance. Thomas nodded, but his eyes were on his mother and Vanessa, two women whose lives had once collided through pain and now stood side by side beneath the same sky. As darkness fell, he whispered to himself, No storm lasts forever. That night, after putting Anna to bed, he stepped onto the porch. Margaret was already there, rocking slowly in her chair. Funny thing about storms, she said softly. They wash away dirt, but they also water the seeds. He smiled faintly, and I think ours just bloomed. They sat together in the cool night air, the crickets singing like distant choirs, the Hope Center lights glowing softly in the distance. A quiet promise that truth, compassion, and love would outlast every rumor. Saturday morning brought the sound of birds and the soft clatter of dishes from the kitchen. Margaret was already up, humming an old hymn about grace and mercy. The house smelled like cinnamon toast and coffee. Thomas came down the stairs in a gray sweater, rubbing his eyes, his expression lighter than it had been in days. Morning, Mom, he said, his voice still rough from sleep. Morning, baby, she replied, not looking up from the stove. Your story's all over the news again, but this time, the truth's got the headline. He paused. What do you mean? She handed him the folded newspaper on the counter. The headline read, Whitmore Foundation cleared of all allegations community rallies behind beloved philanthropist. Beneath it was a photo of the Hope Center glowing under the evening lights, children smiling in front of the new construction site. Thomas exhaled, relief washing over him. So it's done? Margaret nodded. The woman made good on her word. Vanessa gave them everything they needed. You're clean as a whistle. He took a deep breath, a quiet gratitude filling his chest. Then maybe she's finally free too. Margaret smiled knowingly. Forgiveness sets everyone free, son. Even the ones who don't know how to ask for it. Just then, Anna came running in. Her curls bouncing. Her face bright. Daddy, look. Miss Denise sent a message. She held up a note drawn in bright crayon colors. Hope Fair, today. Bring your smile. Thomas laughed. Guess that's an invitation we can't refuse. By late morning, they arrived at the Hope Center. The place had been transformed overnight into a lively festival. Stalls lined the yard, homemade pies, handmade crafts, and kids' artwork hung on string lines fluttering in the wind. The sound of music and laughter filled the air. Denise spotted them immediately. There's our hero, she called out, waving a lemonade. Thomas shook his head, smiling. No heroes here, just workers. Fine, she teased. Our favorite worker, then. Anna darted off toward the art table where other children were painting small tiles for the center's mosaic wall. Margaret joined a group of church ladies arranging flowers near the entrance, while Thomas wandered the fair, greeting volunteers and neighbors. It felt different this time, no cameras, no speeches, no expectations, just people, real people. The way life was supposed to feel. As he was helping a boy fix a broken kite, Vanessa appeared quietly at his side. She wore jeans and a simple blue shirt. Her expression shy but peaceful. Didn't think I'd see you again so soon, Thomas said gently. I wasn't sure I'd be brave enough to come, she admitted. But Margaret called me this morning, said there's always room for one more heart trying to heal. He smiled faintly. That sounds like her. They stood in silence for a moment, watching Anna run across the grass with her kite. Then Vanessa said, Thomas, I know I can't erase what I did, but I want to do something right this time. I want to work here, at the center. Maybe help manage the women's program." He looked at her, studying the sincerity in her eyes. "You sure about that?" "Yes," she said softly. "I spent so many years climbing ladders that led nowhere. Maybe it's time I learn how to build a foundation instead." He smiled gently. "Then welcome home, Vanessa." Tears shimmered in her eyes. "Thank you." The rest of the afternoon unfolded like a painting. The sun dipped low, casting long golden light across the festival. Margaret danced slowly with one of the older church deacons while children ran in circles around them, their laughter rising like bells. Denise organized a raffle to raise money for school supplies, while Anna stood proudly at the booth, calling out numbers in her sweet, clear voice. "Daddy, we raised $100, she shouted. Thomas laughed, clapping his hands. "That's more than my first paycheck, kiddo." When the music quieted and evening began to settle, Pastor Harris gathered everyone in front of the new building site. He raised his hands and said, "Let us give thanks not for money or success, but for hearts that remember where they came from." As the crowd bowed their heads, Thomas felt Margaret's hand slip into his. Her skin was warm, her grip firm despite her age. "This is what love looks like when it grows up," she whispered. He looked around the children, the neighbors, even Vanessa, standing quietly at the back, wiping her eyes, and he realized she was right. When the prayer ended, the crowd broke into laughter and chatter again. Fireflies began to flicker in the air, their lights dancing over the grass. Margaret leaned close to Thomas. "You've turned pain into purpose, baby. That's a miracle right there." He smiled, voice soft. "Maybe the storm was never meant to destroy me, Mom. Maybe it was meant to wash me clean." She nodded. "That's how grace works. It wrecks you first, then rebuilds you stronger." As the fair wound down, Thomas found himself standing alone near the mural wall. The children had added new tiles today, bright colors, clumsy letters, spelling words like faith, family, home. He touched the tile. Anna had painted a sun surrounded by 3 figures holding hands and whispered, "We made it." Vanessa approached quietly. "You really did." He turned to her, offering a faint smile. "We all did." When night finally came, they drove home under a sky full of stars. Anna slept in the back seat, clutching a balloon that bobbed gently in rhythm with the car's motion. Margaret sat beside him, humming softly. Thomas glanced at her. "You ever think about how far we've come?" She smiled. "Every day. And I thank God for every mile." As they turned onto their quiet street, the porch light glowed ahead, steady, warm, waiting. For Thomas, that light meant everything. It meant home. He parked the car, lifted Anna into his arms, and whispered to himself, "We're finally where we're supposed to be." Inside, the house was filled with the soft scent of Margaret's flowers. He laid Anna in her bed, kissed her forehead, and stood by the window a moment longer, watching the stars. Peace, at last, had found its place to stay. Sunday morning arrived like a quiet hymn, the kind of day that didn't need to announce itself. The sun was soft, the sky clear, and the smell of blooming magnolias drifted through the open windows. The house on Oakwood Lane felt alive with calm. Margaret sat on the porch, a shawl around her shoulders, her Bible resting in her lap. She wasn't reading, just tracing her fingers along the worn leather cover, lost in thought. Inside, Thomas was making breakfast eggs, bacon, and biscuits, humming off-key to an old Sam Cooke tune. Anna sat on the counter, helping by dropping blueberries into a bowl, one by one, occasionally sneaking one into her mouth. When the food was ready, Thomas set the plates down on the table. "All right, ladies," he called. "The chef requests your presence." Margaret chuckled as she stepped in. If the chef ever learns to make grits without burning them, he'll really be something. "Work in progress," he said, grinning. They ate together slowly, without hurry, as sunlight painted gold over the walls. It was one of those mornings where nothing extraordinary happened, and yet it felt holy. After breakfast, they decided to visit the Hope Center. Margaret brought a pie she'd baked for the volunteers, and Anna carried her art supplies. The drive through East Point was peaceful. Children played on front lawns, and the scent of barbecues already filled the air. When they arrived, the new wing stood tall and gleaming in the sunlight. The sign above the entrance read, "The Grace Wing, built with love." Volunteers and families milled about the courtyard. Denise met them at the door, her face glowing. "Thomas, you picked a good day to stop by. The first group of mothers from the shelter program moved in this morning. They're settling into their rooms right now." Thomas smiled, pride softening his features. "That was fast." Good news travels fast," Denise said. "And faith works faster." Inside, laughter and chatter echoed through the new halls. Children chased each other down the corridor while their mothers unpacked in modest but cozy rooms. The smell of fresh paint mixed with the scent of cornbread from the kitchen. Margaret handed the pie to a young woman who thanked her tearfully. "Ma'am," the woman said, "I never thought I'd have a bed again, let alone a place this beautiful." Margaret smiled gently. "You don't owe me thanks, honey. Just promise me you'll rest easy tonight." Outside, Thomas found Anna sitting cross-legged on the pavement, painting another tile for the mural wall. He crouched beside her. "What's this one going to say?" She dipped her brush and said proudly, "It's going to say, 'Love never quits.'" He nodded slowly. "That's a good one, sweetheart." A few minutes later, Vanessa joined them, carrying a box of new supplies. She looked at the wall of finished tiles and smiled. "You know," she said quietly, "I think this place healed more people than we'll ever know." Thomas looked up at her. "That's the hope, isn't it? That we build something that keeps healing, even when we're gone." She nodded, eyes glistening. "Thank you for letting me be part of it." He smiled faintly. "Everyone deserves a chance to build again." As the day stretched on, people gathered under the shade trees for a small picnic. Margaret sat surrounded by children who begged her for stories from back in the day, while Denise organized games. Anna ran around with the other kids, her laughter bright and unrestrained. Thomas stood watching from a few feet away, his hands in his pockets, heart full. For the first time in his life, he felt no need to prove anything to anyone. No deals to chase, no towers to build, just this moment. When evening came, Pastor Harris arrived for a short dedication ceremony. The crowd quieted as he raised his hands and said, "The Grace Wing isn't just a building. It's a reminder that love can grow from the hardest soil. That no storm is wasted if it teaches us compassion." He turned to Thomas. "Brother Whitmore, you lost everything the world values, but you gained everything that matters." Thomas lowered his gaze, emotion thick in his voice. "I just followed my mother's lessons. She always said love is the only investment that never fails." "Oh," the crowd murmured, "Amen." As twilight settled, the group sang softly an old hymn Margaret loved. "Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound." The words drifted through the warm air, mingling with the rustle of leaves and the laughter of children. Afterward, Margaret took Thomas's hand and squeezed it. "You did good, baby." He smiled, voice low. "No, Mom. You did. You kept us alive when I didn't know what living meant." Her eyes shimmered with pride. "That's what mothers do. But you," she paused, her voice trembling, "you turned survival into purpose. That's rarer than gold." The sun slipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet. Families began to leave, the courtyard emptying slowly until only the Whitmores and a few volunteers remained. Thomas stood by the mural wall one last time. The final tile Anna had painted had dried now, its words shining softly in the lamplight. "Love never quits." He traced the letters gently, whispering, "No, it doesn't." Margaret joined him, slipping her arm through his. Anna came running up and hugged his leg. Together they stood there, 3 generations bound not by wealth or legacy, but by grace. "Daddy," Anna said sleepily, "are we going home now?" He looked down at her, smiling. "We're already home, sweetheart." They walked to the car, their footsteps slow and steady under the starlit sky. Behind them, the Hope Center lights glowed warm against the dark, steady, eternal, like the kind of love that doesn't fade when life changes. As they reached the road, Margaret turned back for one last look. "You think people will remember this place long after we're gone?" Thomas looked toward the glowing sign, the Grace Wing, and said softly, "They won't need to remember the place. They'll feel it in the lives it touched." Margaret smiled. "Then that's enough." When they got home, Thomas tucked Anna into bed, kissed her forehead, and lingered by her side until her breathing slowed. Margaret stood in the doorway, watching them with quiet joy. Later, on the porch, under the silver wash of moonlight, Thomas sat with his mother one last time that night. The world around them was still, but alive, crickets chirping, leaves whispering, a train's distant hum. Margaret looked over at him. "You finally found peace, didn't you?" He nodded. "I didn't find it, Mom. You and Anna built it for me." She smiled, her voice soft as a prayer. "Then promise me something. Anything. Keep building it for others." He took her hand, kissed it gently. "I promise." The night deepened around them, calm and infinite. Inside, Anna murmured in her sleep, her small voice carrying through the window. "Love never quits." Thomas looked up at the stars, tears glistening in his eyes, and whispered, "No, it doesn't." And for the first time since the storm years ago, he finally believed it with all his heart. The story of Thomas Whitmore teaches a simple yet profound truth. Real wealth has nothing to do with money. True success is found in compassion, forgiveness, and the courage to rebuild what pride once destroyed. Through loss, Thomas learned that love is not measured by the size of a house or the weight of a bank account. It's measured by the hands you hold, the hearts you heal, and the peace you create for others. In the end, the greatest legacy any person can leave is not a fortune, but the proof that love never quits.